Hyundai is currently on a roll when it comes to designs, not only for their internal combustion engines, but also more specifically for their EVs. And that's what I want to focus on today in this video. I want to show you the Ioniq 5, the brand new EV from Hyundai. And I'm going to let you know why I think this is already a design legend. And I also want to show you just how good of a design DNA Hyundai has at the moment in comparing a couple models from the lineup and showing you the lines in each model that kind of connects the entire brand. I also want to show you the Ioniq 5 from the early sketches to the production version and the concept in between and what really changed there. So this is the first ever production model of Hyundai's electric sub-brand Ioniq, and the most common concern about EVs as daily drivers is the charging speed and range anxiety. I had this as well before I bought my Tesla, but after I bought it, everything seems to go pretty smoothly as long as you don't take cross-state or planning on doing a cross-country road trip. Then you're gonna have to plan in a little bit more detail and add probably double the time it would take for an internal combustion and to travel the same kind of distance. Well, Hyundai has taken this into consideration as well here with the Ioniq 5 because it features an 800-volt system that could allow for fast charging. And this means that the 5 can be charged from 5 to 80% in just 18 minutes, which I think, I hear this all the time, 5 to 80%, 18-20 minutes. It seems to be kind of normal for EVs, as long as, specifically here for the Ioniq 5, it's plugged into a 350 kilowatt-hour fast charger. And on top of this semi-quick charging rate, it also has a decent range at about 280 miles. And if you're interested in buying one of these Ioniq 5s, which I am, for one, it will be available as both rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive with two different power options. The base model makes 215 horsepower, while the performance version gets a bump of almost 100 horsepower up to 302. So it's an EV. We are used to EVs being pretty quick these days. So what about the Ioniq 5 here and speed? It is a pretty quick little thing. In the base model with the rear-wheel drive, you get 215 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque, and this should give the Ioniq 5 a 0 to 60 time in about 7.4 seconds. Not super fast, not super slow either, so pretty decent for a base model. But if you have the all-wheel drive, which I said has 302 horsepower and 446 pound-feet of torque, this is obviously a little bit quicker, and it does the same sprint 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds. A lot better than the base model, that's for sure. And the base price for the Ioniq 5 is going to start around $45,000. So here we are inside of Photoshop. I want to show you, first of all, before we jump into the Hyundai Dna, I want to show you a couple of cars from the current lineup. This is the sketch for the Ioniq 5 up here. You can see just how loose and at the same time tight this sketch is. I'm not sure what medium this is. It looks kind of like a watercolor pen or something like that because it doesn't have very sharp lines, but at the same time you have a lot of definition in here. So I like this Z shape in the body lines of the Ioniq 5. I think these proportions right here, it looks really good. It looks like a hot hatch. I know Hyundai and everybody says this is an SUV. I guess you can brand whatever you want an SUV these days. I think the only reason I would call this an SUV is because you have some black cladding around the wheel arches. Maybe that automatically qualifies this to be an SUV, but to me, it's more of a sporty hatchback than an SUV. It's a large car. It's a lot bigger than you might expect when you see this out in real life, but it still looks more like a hatchback than an SUV. The Hyundai Santa Fe is an SUV to me. Anyway, so this is one of the early sketches. You can see just how they came up with the proportions of this design right here. Very cool, very sharp, and kind of classic lines in this design. Then these lines here, this sketch went into this 45 concept right here. So you can see just how well this transitioned into the concept version. I think this sketch looks like it's almost been overlaid on top of this. That's how accurate the lines of both the sketches transitioned into this concept right here. I think it's a beautiful design, super clean, super classic, but at the same time, using these lines in the middle of the car like that, it creates a strong brand identity at the same time while keeping it very, very simple as well. Now, it is an EV, and yes, I've said this before, that when you transition an EV concept into production, usually you don't need to change a lot. For example, you can have a look at the Audi e-tron GT, for example, a prime example of when the concept basically turns around and becomes the production without any major changes. However, in this case right here, we can see see here, if we look at the concept right here, there are a few things we can see from the get-go that needs to change into production. For example, the window here looks too flush. We need to have something around the window here for production. We also need to have some door handles at some point. We also need some sort of a rear mirror right here that needs to be added for production, and small changes like that it is required either by functionality or by regulation when you turn a concept into production. You can see how that turned out in the production version down here. I think this is a fantastic transition from concept to production. They really kept the same spirit of the concept, and I would say almost the same stance. The stance is usually what gets lost in the transition from concept to production, but I think they did a good job here. You still have a pretty cool stance down here in the production version. You can see that the rake here is now a little bit more upright with this added wing right here, or spoiler at the top, and we also have section lines for caps, charging ports, and so on that needs to be added, and a little bit more graphic features. For example, these lines down here, which I think just adds to this design. It makes it look even more retro. It reminds me of a Nintendo 8-bit console, if you remember those back in the day, and it kind of has that same vibe in my opinion. It's a really cool car, and I really love this design overall, and it just shows how fun designers currently have at Hyundai, specifically working on the Ioniq sub-brand right here. And look at these pixelated LEDs right here. I just love it. We're gonna show this. I'm gonna show you more of these details when we look at this from a rear, side, and front view. Before we do that, I want to show you the Hyundai Dna at the moment. What they decided to start doing, I would say, just 3 to 4 years ago, and that is working on the shoulder line and cutting the shoulder line in different ways to create sharp lines and creases within the body, but that also creates a unique brand identity that I don't think I've seen before. So we talked about the Ioniq right here. You have this section line, or these cross lines right here in the body, so it kind of breaks up the shoulder line, but at the same time it gives it a forward motion when you look at this from a side view, which you're going to do in just a second here. And this goes on for the new Elantra here as well. You have the shoulder line being broken right here in a lot of different ways. What I prefer here about the Ioniq 5 is that this cross section here, this point, sits further forward in the side view of the car than it does on the Elantra. On the Elantra, it almost sits right in the middle of the car here, which kind of doesn't really help the dynamic movement of the design. I would love to see this being moved forward a little bit, and I made a redesign of that on the Sketch Monkey channel, I believe, a long time ago. You can go and check that out if you want to. When I move this, where the lines cross, I move that point a little bit forward this way to create this forward motion. And then we have another version of this in the new Santa Cruz down here. You can see the shoulder line goes here normal up until this point, where it just crashes into some particle or something, and then just explodes into 2 different trajectories like this. Very cool idea, and very unique, innovative idea of working with the shoulder line to create something new, and also that's something that's going to connect the entire lineup. So now I want to have a look at the front view here and let you know why I think the Ioniq 5 is already on the path of becoming an iconic design legend right here. So let's have a look at the front view. And of course, I threw in the first generation Golf, designed by none other than the Italian legendary design house Giugiaro, and I think these two have a lot in common, specifically when you look at them like this side by side. So let's have a look at the front view here. Just have a look at the lines, overall lines of the Ioniq here and the lines of the Golf. They're very, very similar. There's not a lot of differences here. Yes, there is, I don't know how many years, 50 years between these two designs, but the fundamental spirit of these two designs are so similar to me. You even have 2 headlights in the front here, which you have on the Golf here as well. You can see the GTI with the red framing of the grille, although this is a GTS right here. It's a 4-door. I think this looks really cool. You also have the traditional Giugiaro C-pillar right here, which have stuck with Golf ever since the first generation. And the overall feeling of this design just feels like they have a lot in common, specifically looking at the rear view and, last but not least, in a minute here, the side view. So have a look at this C-pillar right here. Very much inspired by the Golf. I mean, it's not like they must have looked at the Golf down here and had a look at this. So this thickness, the relationship to the B-pillar, for example, and to the A-pillar, and then added the same kind of relationship between those pillars in the new Ioniq 5. That creates creates a beautiful design, because we already know that the Mark 1 Golf is a legendary, timeless kind of hatchback design. So why not take some inspiration from that and then retro design with these pixelated taillights and everything like this? I think it looks cool. I think this Ioniq 5 could honestly be a perfect EV modernization of the original Golf down here. This just looks like it could be a modern version of it, based on not only the graphic but the overall proportions, as I said, the spirit of this design. So last but not least, let's just quickly have a look at the side view right here and compare the lines. So we have this line right here, we have this line right here, and then we have the roof line, of course, which is looking a lot more modern up here than it does on this 1970s Golf, which is expected, of course, because they are two completely different generations, or even time periods or time zones, but they still have the same kind of lines here, the basic lines that goes in both of these cars. And I think it's so cool to see Hyundai bringing back something like this. I'm just a little, as I said, confused as to why they call it an SUV. If they would call it a hatchback, I would assume it has to do a lot with sales and how people perceive the word hatchback. People are not really, especially here in the US, they're not really into buying something that's called a hatchback. If you put the name SUV on it, people are gonna be more excited about it here. And also, if you put some cladding, plastic cladding around the wheel arches right here, you're definitely gonna sell more than if you remove that. It's just stupid. It's the same thing with the GLA. For example, you can't sell the normal A-class hatchback here in the US. Nobody would buy it, but if you add a little black plastic cladding and call it a GLA SUV or crossover, people get so excited and absolutely want to buy it. I think that has a little bit to do with why they call it an SUV right here. What's really cool in the side view right here is, as you can see, it is an EV based on just the wheelbase and how far the wheels stick out to the far ends of the body here. Super short overhangs both front and rear. And I can't wait to see the Ioniq 6, which will be based on one of the coolest concepts of last year, the Hyundai Prophecy, and how they transitioned that one into production. I think the change is going to be a lot more substantial there, because the concept is it has a joystick. So yeah, you're going to have to do a lot more changes there, turn that into production. It's going to be cool to see how they're going to do that with the Ioniq 6 up next.